All right, so are you ready to dive in? Today, we're tackling the U.S. election and what it could mean for Israel's security.
Sounds intense.
It is. And we've got some really fascinating source material to work with. It's a recording of a Zoom call.
Oh, wow. Like a fly on the wall situation.
Exactly. And it features former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Tom Nides.
Interesting.
Plus, we've got Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum and Israeli-American political strategist Ofer Gutzon in the mix as well.
Okay, so a pretty diverse group of voices.
Definitely. And right from the beginning, things get, well, kind of crazy.
Oh, what happened? Spill the tea.
Someone Zoom bombs the call.
Ugh, I hate when that happens.
Right. And it wasn't just any Zoom bombing. This was some seriously ugly anti-Semitic stuff.
Wow, that's awful.
Yeah, even writing Hitler on the whiteboard.
Oh, geez. That's disturbing, especially in this context.
Totally. And it really sets the stage for the rest of the discussion, this sense of anxiety, the climate we're in.
I can imagine.
And Nides really gets into it, talking about the Biden-Harris administration's track record on Israel.
Oh, I bet that's interesting.
It is. He tackles those concerns some voters have head-on, like what would a potential Harris administration mean, especially for Israel's security?
Yeah, that's a big question for a lot of people.
And Nides doesn't shy away from it. He straight up says Harris will have Israel's back.
Really? That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. But he points to her actions, her strong words about supporting Israel's right to defend itself.
That's good. Actions speak louder than words, as they say.
Exactly. And he highlights the administration's commitment to providing resources, the stuff Israel needs.
So he's saying her actions back up her words. I like it.
Yeah, and he brings up something else, too. During the 2020 Democratic Convention, the platform under her leadership, exceptionally pro-Israel, he says.
Huh. Hadn't thought about that.
And he doesn't stop there. Nides even calls Biden the most pro-Israel president since Harry Truman.
Whoa. That's a hefty claim. What makes him say that?
He points to their response to the October 7th attacks. That immediate, consistent support. Sending military aid, defense systems.
Right. That was a scary time. A lot of folks are definitely looking for a leader who's got Israel's back in a crisis.
Absolutely. And Nides definitely plays into that. But then he shifts gears a bit, starts talking about the America First approach and how that could actually be a concern.
Ooh, that's an interesting angle.
It is. He's worried about that isolationist rhetoric, like what if the U.S. steps back from its global role?
Yeah, I can see how that could be a problem for Israel.
Right. It could weaken those global alliances that are so crucial for their security. Nides is a big believer in collaborative international engagement.
It makes sense, especially when you think about the Iranian threat.
You're reading my mind. Nides tackles that head-on, says it's serious, obviously, but that things like immediate military strikes aren't the answer.
I see. So what's the alternative?
He's all about a more coordinated, strategic approach. And he highlights the Biden-Harris administration's support for Israel's ability to handle the situation, like providing those advanced defense systems.
Makes sense. Empowering Israel to defend itself.
Exactly. But he goes even further and paints a picture of what the day after a potential Harris win might look like. Bringing hostages home, rebuilding Gaza, ensuring Israel's safety against threats like Hezbollah.
Okay, so a mix of what? Security and humanitarian efforts.
It sounds like it, right? A more nuanced approach. And throughout all of this, Nides seems to be saying, hey, Harris is tough, she's a decision maker.
Interesting. So is he saying she won't be swayed by, let's say, advisors with different opinions on Israel?
That's the vibe I'm getting. He's really painting her as this strong, decisive leader who's ready to tackle those complex foreign policy challenges.
And he links it all back to his personal background, right? Growing up Jewish, the emphasis on community involvement.
You got it. He says that shaped his view of supporting Israel, how it's part of a broader commitment to humanity and inclusivity.
That's a powerful connection. It adds a personal touch to what could be a very abstract political discussion.
Absolutely. And speaking of personal, he tells this really interesting story about Doug Emhoff.
Kamala Harris's husband.
The one and only. And his focus on anti-Semitism, like it's a deeply personal thing for him.
Interesting. So is this going back to that Zoom bombing incident?
In a way, yeah. It connects back to those anxieties. But what Nides highlights is that Emhoff has been fighting anti-Semitism for a while now. Made it a central theme of his campaigning, even gave a speech at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement.
It is, and it goes beyond campaigning. He's been involved with the U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism.
Huh. So it sounds like a real commitment, not just a political move.
That's what Nides is getting at. It's like he's saying, look, this is who they are. This is what they stand for.
I get it. Connecting those personal values to the administration's stance as a whole.
Exactly. But you know what? We've only just scratched the surface here.
Seriously, there's more.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole other side to this. Like those anxieties about a potential Trump presidency and the whole America First philosophy.
Okay, yeah, we definitely need to explore that.
We do, because those differing viewpoints are crucial to understanding the full picture, right? And, dear listener, this is where you come in. What are your thoughts so far?
It's interesting, right? Nides makes a pretty good case for a Harris administration, but he's coming at it from a certain angle.
Yeah, it's like he's speaking directly to those folks who are unsure about her, especially when it comes to Israel.
Right. He keeps going back to her track record, those actions that support Israel. But what about the other side of the coin? That whole Trump thing.
He did mention it, didn't he? Especially those concerns about America First.
Yeah, like when he was worried about isolationist policies messing things up with global alliances.
Totally. And that can have a huge impact on Israel's security.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, if the U.S. pulls back from the world stage, what happens in the Middle East?
Exactly. And what about Iran? Nides seemed pretty set on a more strategic approach, working with other countries, not just jumping into military action.
I see. So more of a long game. I wonder how that stacks up against what we've heard from other sources.
That's a great point, especially those sources that might be more aligned with a potential Trump administration. It's like two totally different paths.
It is, and this is where you come in, dear listener. What are your thoughts on all of this?
What are your priorities when it comes to U.S. support for Israel? Because, like Nides talks about that day after with Harris,
Yeah,
right?
the whole bringing hostages home, rebuilding Gaza, securing Israel against Hezbollah. But it's important to figure out what resonates with you.
Right. What actions would really show you that the U.S. is genuinely supporting Israel?
It's about looking beyond those fancy speeches and slogans and thinking about what concrete steps actually align with your values.
Totally. Like, is it about working together with other countries on Iran or a more aggressive approach? Or maybe it's about having a strong U.S. military presence in the region or diplomacy.
Those are the questions we need to grapple with, right?
Yeah,
The ones that force us to think a little deeper and not just accept those easy answers.
exactly. And speaking of thinking deeper, remember how Nades talked about his own personal background? How growing up Jewish really influenced his views on supporting Israel.
Yeah. It's like he was saying that his commitment to Israel is also tied to this broader idea of humanity and inclusivity.
And that's a powerful message, right? Like, supporting Israel doesn't have to be this separate thing. It can be part of something bigger.
Absolutely. It's about finding those solutions that bring peace and security for everyone involved.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, remember that this is just the beginning. It's about taking what you've learned and continuing to explore these issues.
Talking to people, maybe even challenging your own assumptions. Because ultimately, it's your informed action that makes a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and delve into those anxieties surrounding a potential Trump presidency.
Right. Nides touched on it, but there's so much more to unpack, especially when it comes to that America First approach and how it could impact global alliances.
And what about Israel's security? That's the big question, isn't it? So, dear listener, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this whole America First thing?
What resonates with you? What are you worried about? Because understanding both sides of this, the potential risks and benefits, is essential.
It's about going beyond those simple narratives and really grappling with the complexities. And remember, there are no right or wrong answers here.
It's about exploring, questioning, and forming your own opinions based on the evidence and, what matters to you.
So let's dive in. Let's unpack those anxieties, those contrasting viewpoints, and try to understand what a potential Trump presidency could mean for Israel.
Because ultimately, this deep dive is all about empowering you, dear listener, equipping you with the knowledge and tools to make a difference, to become an informed and engaged citizen.
And with that in mind, let's take a moment to reflect. We've heard from Nides, we've started to explore those anxieties about a potential Trump presidency.
And now it's your turn. What are your biggest takeaways so far? What questions are you wrestling with? What parts of this conversation do you want to dive deeper into?
We've talked about a lot, right? From that Zoom bombing to the different potential administrations to America First policies. It's a lot to take in.
It is. It feels like, I don't know, a really pivotal moment. Two different paths for the U.S. and Israel. And, dear listener, it all comes down to you. Your vote.
Yeah, your vote really does matter. And remember Nides talking about that day after with Harris as president? He seemed pretty optimistic, bringing hostages home, rebuilding Gaza, keeping Israel safe from Hezbollah.
Right. But what about you? What would make you feel like the U.S. was really, truly supporting Israel?
That's the question, isn't it? What actions really matter to you?
We're going deeper than just words here. We need to think about the concrete steps that match your values.
Exactly. And there's so many different ways to think about it. Like, what about Iran? Should the U.S. work with other countries, like Needs suggested, or take a tougher stance?
Or what about the U.S. military? Do they need a big presence in the region, or is diplomacy a better way to go?
It's about asking those tough questions, challenging ourselves to think beyond the easy answers. And, I keep thinking back to Nides talking about his own experiences growing up Jewish, community involvement being so important.
Right. It reminds us that these policies, they affect real people. It's about values. It's about lived experiences.
And like he said, supporting Israel doesn't have to clash with supporting humanity, with inclusivity.
It's about finding that sweet spot, those solutions that help everyone. Peace and security for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this. Keep learning, keep asking those questions, keep the conversation going.
Because it
Yeah.
matters. You matter. And what you do with this information, how you choose to engage, that shapes the world around us.
That's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us, and keep thinking critically about these important issues.